Hi, welcome. We are live in the Grand Ballroom at the Little America Hotel and Resort in Cheyenne, Wyoming, for the final open presidential debate of the 2020 election cycle, presented by the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, and open the debates here in conjunction with the inaugural Independent National Convention. I am Christina Tobin of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and will serve as moderator tonight. We'd like to begin by thanking the candidates. Brian Carroll with the American Solidarity Party, Brock Pierce, Independent, Gloria Lariva, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and Howie Hawkins, Green Party. Don Blankenship of the Constitution Party confirmed, but is now absent. Special thanks to Doug Goodfeather for leading us in a Lakota prayer. Our producer, Cassidy Marley, Amanda Poole, and Steve Snyder of Imagine Event Services, and our national Free and Equal team, both here and virtually. We'd like to especially thank our debate sponsors, who without them, this would not be possible, including the Independent National Convention, Nexus, Independent Voter Project, Taxpayers United of America, and Alma Healing. The format will be a variation of the cumulative time debate format. After introductions, each candidate will have an opportunity to make a 2-minute opening statement. The order of the statements will be determined at random. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question. Each candidate will have a total of 3 more opportunities to take 1 additional minute to offer a rebuttal or expand upon their previous answer. For instance, you could use your extra minute on each of the first 3 questions, or you could choose to save them for the last 3 questions. You may use any of your extra minutes on the same question after each candidate has had an opportunity to use one in order to encourage a free exchange of ideas. Extra minutes do not carry over into closing statements. Each candidate will be permitted a 2-minute closing statement. So let the debate begin. We're going to open with an opening statement from Gloria Lariva of the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you for hosting this and being such a determined fighter for equal access. My name is Gloria Lariva. I'm on the ballot in 13 states for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and in Vermont for the Liberty Union Party. I'm on in California for the Peace and Freedom Party. I'm a socialist, and my organizations, we believe that in this unprecedented crisis of COVID-19, of the economic crisis that was already deepening for the vast majority of people in the United States, and the environmental disaster that is upon us all over the world. And we see with the fires in California and the West Coast, Colorado, and also the hurricanes in the Gulf Coast, that we can no longer accept the capitalist system destroying our lives. That it is unsustainable for capitalism to continue, especially the United States capitalist class, which is the most powerful in the world. As one example of their taking advantage of the crisis that we're living in now, in the first 9 weeks of the pandemic, 600 billionaires amassed $434 billion in added income over what they already have in their coffers. While people are getting poorer and poorer, and tens of millions are facing eviction, have lost their jobs, and by losing their jobs have lost health care. Both candidates, Democrat and Republican, refuse to address the issue of needed health care. We call for free health care for all. We call for cancellation of student debt. We call for the cancellation of all rents and mortgages, including for small business and small landlords. There are 260,000 restaurants, for example, that have already closed in this pandemic and have no hope of opening up. In this enrichment of the super wealthy and the major corporations, the small businesses, small landlords, and of course the working class are being ruined. And at the end of this process, if we do not win back those gains and demands that we are demanding, then what it means is that the rich will be ever more richer. The monopolies will grow ever more, including the home builders, the real estate industry, and why it is ultimately that only socialism can resolve the crisis for humanity. We also say that there's an enormous threat to increase war, occupation, sanctions against other countries for simply wanting to be independent and sovereign from the United States. We call for sovereignty also of native nations in the US, and including so many violations of treaties, 370 treaties that were signed, all of them violated. We call for all of them to be honored. And I'm not sure what my time is. I can't see a time.
The clock is down here.
Thank you.
Okay,
You're right at 2 minutes, Gloria, if
Okay.
you want to wrap it up, and then we'll set it. Thank you so much, Gloria. Brock Pierce, Independent.
I'm Brock Pierce, and I'm grateful to be here with each of these presidential candidates. I'd like to give thanks to Free and Equal for opening up the debates and making this possible. I'd like to thank the INC for bringing everybody together for this inaugural event. And I'd like to thank the state of Wyoming, the city of Cheyenne, and Mayor Orr for all that she's done. So why am I running for president? I'm running because I love this country. I love the American people, and I am deeply concerned about our collective future. What is America's 5-year plan? What is our 25-year plan? If you don't have an aim, you will wander aimlessly. Technology is going to be replacing tens of millions of jobs, and we are going to have to find a way to make sure that everyone's most basic needs are met, which is why I advocate for a universal earned income so that no one in this country is starving to death. Everyone has access to some form of shelter, and everyone has access to some form of health care. I think we also need to take a step back and redefine what our success is. How do we measure our success? Historically, it's been by growth, blind growth. And growth assumes we have infinite resources, which we know we don't have. And it doesn't differentiate between positive and negative. I recommend we measure our success by our lives, by our liberty, and by our happiness. Life expectancy. By our freedom, we are supposed to be the land of the free. We don't need for-profit prisons. We have more people in prison than any other country in the world. Let's be the land of the free. And to measure our success by happiness. And remember to vote. Vote your conscience. Always, that is our lesson in life. Act according to your conscience. Vote your conscience. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Howie Hawkins with the Green Party.
Well, good evening. I'm a retired Teamster, worked construction sites and warehouses for over 50 years. But that was to pay the bills. What I've really been about is social movements. Got started, civil rights, then anti-Vietnam War, then the early ecology movement coming up in the San Francisco Bay Area, out in California. And we framed my campaign around 3 life or death issues. One is obviously the climate crisis. And I was the first candidate in this country to campaign for a Green New Deal back in 2010. We have a detailed eco-socialist Green New Deal budget that will employ 38 million people caring for people in the planet to get us to 100% clean energy and 0 to negative greenhouse gas emissions in a decade. Part of our Green New Deal is the Economic Bill of Rights. And that's to deal with the fact that working class life expectancies are in decline in this country. That's inexcusable. They call them deaths of despair. So this Economic Bill of Rights includes the right to a job, an income above poverty, Medicare for all, public housing so everybody has an affordable option, lifelong public education through college, and raise Social Security benefits so seniors don't have to work till they drop dead. They can retire above the poverty line. And finally, we got a nuclear arms race nobody's talking about. Bullets in the atomic scientist says the doomsday clock of theirs, the closest it's ever been to midnight. So we're calling for peace initiatives. Cut the military budget 75%. Bring the troops home from these endless wars. pledge no first use of nuclear weapons, and then go to the other nuclear powers and say, tensions are reduced, we want complete and mutual nuclear disarmament, and go there with world public opinion. 122 nations agreed to the text of a treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons 3 years ago. International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in this country knows that because the two major parties are for the nuclear modernization, deployment of these strategic nukes and tactical nukes, and the corporate state media stenographers won't talk about anything the two major parties don't talk about. This should be a top campaign issue. And that's one of the goals of my campaign, and I'm out of time. Thank you.
Brian Carroll, American Solidarity Party.
Yes, and I also want to thank Christina and everybody involved in putting this together. I understand it was fairly short notice, and you've done a really good job. And I am with the American Solidarity Party, and we are a brand new thing on the American scene. But what we share with each of the ones up here, we share a faith and a hope that America is not going to be, we have two political parties telling us that in January, Democrats tell us that if the Republicans win, our republic is dead in January, and the Democrats, well, it's the other way around. Each of them is telling us if they don't win, it's all over. And if any of us thought that for a minute, we would not be here tonight. We are here because we believe the American nation has strengths that can survive any of the current crises that we are facing. We are a new party. We are looking down the road. It's a delayed gratification kind of thing. We know that we are probably not going to be elected this year, but we defy labels. If you go to the I Side With quiz and look at that, their algorithm calls me a democratic socialist. But I was endorsed last week in the American Conservative magazine by Rod Dreher. Now, if that can happen, something new is happening. We are in the tradition of Edmund Burke and William Wilberforce, who we think of as conservatives, but they were social justice warriors fighting their whole lives against slavery. We are in the tradition of G.K. Chesterton and Hilhard Belloc, who were both active in criticizing both the extremes of socialism and the extremes of capitalism. And they favored a program called distributism, and I'm out of time.
Thank you. Our first question will be from Chad Peace of Independent Voter Project and the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. So let's please play his question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chad Peace. I'm president of IVC Media. I'm a founding board member of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, and I'm a legal counsel to the Independent Voter Project. Now, it's no secret that American voters are frustrated with the level of partisanship and the quality of the political discourse we have in this country right now. Perhaps at no time in history has there been more focus on the Presidential Debate Commission itself. I'm proud to have authored 2 briefs in support of a lawsuit filed by Level the Playing Field nearly 5 years ago, challenging the nonprofit status of the commission, as well as the 15% threshold to get into the presidential debate. So here's my question for you. If you could oversee the presidential debates, what kind of governing body would you have implement the rules, and what rules would you implement in order to ensure that there's more voices in the debate, that the debate is fair, and that the American people have a more robust dialogue among a more diverse pool of candidates in the most important conversation that candidates can have with the American people?
The governing body for the debates should be transparent and unbiased. I do not think it should be run by the 2 political parties. It should not be run by political parties. League of Women Voters used to run the debates, and they did a great job until the two major parties took it over. I think we need to have different qualifications for your eligibility to participate in those debates, probably starting with being on enough ballots to win. Running polls that are actually fair and asking people, all of the names that are listed right now, when you're running for, to get on the ballots today, you need the open debates, you need 15% of the popular vote in the polls. The problem is when the phone rings and you answer, they say, are you voting for the Democrat or Republican? And if you say, I'm voting for Brock Pierce or any one of us, they say, sorry, that's not an option. And they say, which are you voting for, the Democrat or the Republican? You say, I'm voting for Brock Pierce or one of us. They say, oh, we're marking you down as undecided. The system is corrupt. The commission is corrupt. The commission is commissioning these polls in such a way that it is rigged, where no third-party candidate can participate. The last time that happened was with Ross Perot in 1992. I'd like to see the League of Women Voters or another organization like it in charge, specifically an organization not run by a political party, with a transparent system that gives us the choice that we deserve as Americans. Thank you.
Howie Hawkins.
Yeah, the Commission on Presidential Debates is a giant corporate fraud. Sounds like a government agency, huh? Like the Federal Election Commission. In fact, it's a private corporation controlled by the Democrats and Republicans. They negotiate a contract and hand it to the news organizations and say, this is what we're going to do. Should be the opposite, like when the League of Women Voters was sponsoring it. They get together with news organizations, plan the debates, and invite the candidates. I think what we really need is public campaign financing, and when you accept that money, you have to participate in debates. A Teamster brother of mine ran for governor as a Green Party candidate in Arizona. They have public campaign financing in their state elections. And he got to debate his governor and the other major party candidate. I ran against Governor Cuomo 2 years ago. He wouldn't debate me because he had all this Wall Street money and real estate money. He didn't need to talk to the people because he could just advertise on TV. So we need a public campaign finance, full public campaign financing. Get this dirty, dark money out of there. We got hundreds of millions of dollars in this campaign of dark money. We don't know where it came from, the mob, some foreign country, or just some rich folks. But there's no way to trace it. We got the best government private money can buy it, and that's a crime in itself as well. And I agree. For the presidential debates, any candidates on enough ballots to win the electoral college under the current system should be included. I'm on 30 ballots. That's 381 electoral votes. You need 270 to win. That's 73% of the American people can vote for me. Counting the write-in ballots, it's 514 electoral votes and 96% of the American people. And I submit to you that our program of a Green New Deal, an economic Bill of Rights, and ending these endless wars is more popular than what Biden and Trump are providing with the people, according to public opinion polls. And we're not in the debates. It's a huge fraud. And the other thing, once we have a lot of candidates in debates, it's been suggested we have open debates in a runoff system. That's when the polls are relevant. Everybody who's got enough ballots to maybe win the election should be in the first debate. And then you poll. And those that are polling enough, you can, have a runoff system going down to the election. That's been suggested by George Farah at Open Debates. And check his site out, opendebates.org. That's where you find out this whole corruption of the debate system. It's all there. Thank you.
Brian Carroll.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with pretty much everything that was said. I'm old enough that I can remember watching Nixon and Kennedy on TV, black and white TV, in the first one, and I was 10, and that introduced me to the whole political thing, and it was very impressive. And they were respectful of each other. They took serious questions and gave serious answers. It was very impressive. And we've lost that, and that's a tragedy. One of the things that we saw earlier this year was when candidates were yelling at each other and interrupting each other. This clock right here is a big step forward over that. Basic rules and hold the people to them. Public financing, yes. We need to overturn Citizens United. That has pumped up so much money, and the politicians don't know what to do with it. In the congressional race in my home district, we're getting sometimes 3 a day from the same candidate, and there is not a single issue mentioned. It's all just casting aspersions on them, you know, digging up dirt and some funny cartoons. We can do better than that. We have serious problems that deserve serious answers. And so we have to overturn Citizens United, get rid of all that other money, do public financing, and raise ourselves to a higher level of campaign dialogue.
Gloria Lariva.
I agree completely that Citizens United must be overturned. And also, the elections are so skewed that, of course, they're not going to let parties like ourselves be on the debate. They need to have the 2 pillars of this imperialist system, which is what it is, to maintain their total control. It's like what they did with the Electoral College in founding the country. In understanding these so-called founding fathers understood that the executive was the most important for them to maintain control of. And it's why they established the Electoral College. I don't believe that a candidate should have to have enough ballot access to assure that they could conceivably win the presidency by the Electoral College. It should be abolished. But in addition, I think that opposing voices, the voices of the people must be heard, whether you think you can win or not. This is the problem, is that people's interests, the working class, the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to enjoy the fruits of the working class's labor is completely hidden from the debates. If you heard the 2 last debates and you asked someone, as I have, what did you hear in those debates? They couldn't tell you. People can't tell you how their needs were addressed. That's the first thing. I think that money talks, and when you have a plutocracy like what we live in, then the electoral system, the political system, will be reflected in that, only for the rich and only for the rulers. And yet we must struggle always to try to have access, to use the electoral arena as I have. My comrades and I have been to 42, I will have been to 42 cities across the country by the time November 3rd passes. And we were without really any funds, volunteerism, purely volunteers. We got on the ballot in 15 states, which is an indication that people do want to have another voice. And by the way, I think that the person who asked the question may be a proponent of the top 2 system that we have, unfortunately, in California and Washington State, which is an anti-democratic measure that denies us the right to our primaries in peace and freedom, for example.
Thank you, Gloria. Our second question will be from Adam Kokesh of the Freedom Network.
Hi, I'm Adam Kokesh, a Marine Corps combat veteran, having served bankers, politicians, and profiteers in Fallujah, Iraq in 2004. My question for the Hi, I'm Adam Kokesh, a Marine Corps combat veteran, having served bankers, politicians, and profiteers in Fallujah, Iraq in 2004. My question for the candidates is about veteran suicide, an undercounted and underreported problem that most Americans would rather ignore. It is not just a problem of PTSD, pharmaceuticals, and VA hospitals, but one that is fundamentally rooted in the evils of militarism. What causes do you think are driving the veteran suicide epidemic, and what are you going to do about it?
Howie Hawkins.
Simplify, Adam. I'm a former Marine as well. I think you put your nail on it. The militarism and the macho militaristic culture puts veterans, particularly men, in a difficult spot when they come back because they have trouble adapting to what we call civilian life. The people that didn't go through what they went through don't understand what they went through, so they have a hard time relating. I think the VA system is good once you're in it, but it's hard to get in, and they're tight about getting people in, so that has to be improved. And we got a opioid epidemic that's as bad as the COVID pandemic, which has taken over 220,000 lives, where we done lost 75,000 people to opioids in the last year. And we've stopped talking about it because we've been worried about this virus, but that's the way a lot of people are passing on. And the problem is we've criminalized drugs, so people who are addicted are afraid to go get treatment because they might get a criminal charge for possession of heroin or whatever the drug is. So that has led to a lot of deaths among veterans who use the opioids to cope with the problems they brought back home with them. We need to legalize marijuana, which a lot of veterans say has helped them cope and adapt to the situation. So there's a lot of things we need to do, but I think Adam put his finger on the real thing, and that's the macho militaristic culture that we see every damn football game when they fly those fighter jets and everybody, sort of pays homage to our military, which mostly doesn't protect us as people in the United States. It's protecting the profit interests of US-based global banks and corporations. So it isn't even, as Adam pointed out, as Marines like Smedley Butler pointed out long ago, war is a racket. And those of us who are drafted or volunteer end up protecting business interests, not the people. And I think some veterans begin to realize that and wonder what the hell they didn't feel guilty for what they might have done. There's a lot there. It's a very deep problem, and it's a cultural problem. The problem of militarism.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll.
Well, first of all, we fight too many wars. Secondly, when we think about military budget, we're only looking at dollars and cents. We're not looking at lives. And when I look at a problem like this, I think back to the first veteran that I knew well, returning from Vietnam. His name was Brian Jones. At UCLA, I had written a 500-page novel. I entered it in a student novel writing contest, and I was beaten by Brian, who had written a 30-page first chapter. And I got to know him. He had been in high school, the All-American everything, captain of the football team, student body president, and he did what was the All-American thing to do. In 1966, he joined the Marines, and he went to Vietnam. And when he came back, and he went into UCLA, he wrote his first chapter, which described the problem, but he could never finish the book. He won a $5,000 prize, went home and beat up his wife, and it cost $5,000 for her medical bills. There is something called perpetrator-induced traumatic stress. We raise people to be good citizens, to respect other people, and then we put them in a military situation and teach them to go kill people. When I asked Brian what his experience was in Vietnam, he simply said, "I killed a lot of gooks." Well, when we raise people to be mature, valuable citizens, and we put them into a situation where they cannot be anything except violent racists, and then we bring them back into our country and we want to reintegrate them into our society, we have to do a whole lot more than we're doing right now. Otherwise, we're going to have the suicides, we're going to have the drug addictions, we're going to have the homelessness, we're going to have spouse abuse. And my time is up.
Thank you. Ms. Lariva.
I think the biggest cause of suicides and mental illness and crises for veterans is that they have been sent to wars of aggression, U.S. wars of aggression. Just starting with Vietnam, but of course there was the Korean War. I worked with many Korean War veterans years ago in my workplace, and each one of those brothers in my union suffered greatly emotionally from having been in combat in Korea. A horrific genocidal war that they understood it to be afterwards. In Vietnam, more veterans committed suicide than died in combat, the 57,000 who died in battle. And of course, they knew, many who came back knew that what they had done was burn villages, strafe bomb, drop Agent Orange. What a horrible thing to send working class youth to. And I was from that generation. I know many of my friends in school joined the military and were really, really affected by it. These wars of aggression, the permanent war that Bush promised in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and other places, and what they have caused, the misery to the world of the people. I was in Iraq, where 2 million people have died from the 2 wars, the occupation, and 12 years of sanctions. And first of all, I do think that Veterans Administration should be fully funded and fully staffed. What people don't know is that the VA is being privatized right now. It started with Obama, but it was accelerated under Trump. And so many, many veterans don't get the care that they need. Those who go to the VA are those who are the poorest, because others who have a little bit more means can have other health care provided. But those who go to the VA are very, the long waiting lines that they talk about, why they have to change it and privatize it, that's because they've deliberately defunded it.
Thank you. Mr. Pierce.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to all those that are members of our military at present or in the past, to our veterans, to thank them for their service. And before we get into the problems of what's causing these suicides, let's stop adding to the problem. Let's stop making war. Let's figure out a process to bring our troops home thoughtfully, not leaving vacuums and creating more problems, but on a base-by-base basis or case-by-case cases. Let's figure out how to bring our military home. And to the numerous reasons that suicide rates are increasing, drugs, we give them this drug and then that drug. They're doing more tours of duty than they did before. We have stop-loss that's signing them up automatically. We have to figure out what they're going in, expecting that what they're doing is good. They're going in to serve and fight for their country, and then realizing that, what are we actually doing here? Those are some of the real problems. And what do we have to do afterwards to take care of our veterans? Let's make sure we are taking care of our veterans, getting them the job training they need so that they can thoughtfully reintegrate into the private sector once they've come home, making sure that we've got the appropriate treatment to address the mental health issues, specifically PTSD. We have new treatments that are showing high efficacy. I think, as was said, the war on drugs, let's end that. Cannabis, may be the answer for a lot of our veterans, just as it has saved my mother. I believe we need to legalize nature on that note. And again, thank you to all of our veterans and all of those members of the military.
Our next question will be from...
Oh, may I have a minute?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I'd like to add more to this. We also call for the complete return of all U.S. troops from abroad. Yeah. And the shutting down of all U.S. bases. There are 37,000 U.S. troops in Korea, South Korea, keeping that country divided. And the whole presence, a continual war exercise against North Korea, where the military just openly says, we're going to decapitate the leader, meaning we're going to destroy that country. We need to bring them home and prevent any more injuries and wounded soldiers, prevent the killing of other people, genocidal killings by this system. We have to prevent war. We have to say that the U.S. is unilaterally should disarm around the world and shut down the bases and allow Palestine, for example, to be free, truly free, and shut down Guantanamo base, return that 47 square miles of territory back to Cuba. That's what we have to do to have real peace and help the veterans and prevent any more wars of aggression.
I'll take a minute too. And I'd like to add, since we brought up South Korea, I currently hold 2 honorary ambassadorship titles there. I've spent a good portion of my life living there. And North and South Korea are separated by the DMZ, which reminds me of the Berlin Wall. These are families that were separated, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers. When that border was put in place, the Korean people, they are brothers and sisters. They are the same people. They love each other, separated by 2 governments. And I pray that that wall falls during our time. If asked to go there, I believe we need to be engaging with foreign leaders, even if we disagree with everything we're doing. The idea of not taking a seat at the table. We have to be engaged in conversation with every one of these people. If we are not talking to them, how do we ever expect to solve problems? It shouldn't begin with quid pro quo. And as far as Cuba is concerned, yes, let's end Guantanamo Bay immediately and end sanctions on Cuba. Embargo.
Blockade.
Move on to our next question. Our question is from Brian Anderson. He's an ambassador of Nexus. We're actually teaming up with Nexus. They're helping to build our blockchain election system voting app. And Brian has a question for our candidates.
My name is Brian Anderson. I'm a U.S. ambassador of Nexus, a decentralized blockchain application platform. These questions are from our community. Thank you for taking the time to address them. The first question: do you feel the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act amendment to the 1948 Smith-Mundt Act that enabled pro-government propaganda material produced by the State Department and Broadcasting Board of Directors is being abused to gain an advantage in elections, politics, or science, particularly public health?
Mr. Carroll.
Well, yeah. And it's, you know, the kinds of things, I referred a little bit earlier to the glossies that I get 3 times a week or 3 times a day sometimes from my congressman and his opponent. And it is, the congressman sends out stuff that's pro-government that is just ridiculous. And, you know, it says the campaign's paying for it. I don't know how to prove that or not. But there is no excuse for the kind of things that government is getting into, even at the state level. One of the things that Mike Pence wanted to do when he was governor of Indiana was create a state news agency that would, you know, publish regular news. Well, government has no business doing that. And we need to get government out of that. We need to have a healthier news media all the way around. We need to make sure that we have a multiple sources so that there's competing ideas going on. Government should not have the job of announcing or publicizing or critiquing itself. That should be outside agencies. We have freedom of the press written into our First Amendment, and we need to pump that up and make it healthier. There is no excuse for government doing that on its own.
Ms. Lariva.
Well, it's interesting that this issue of the U.S.-funded propaganda, I don't know if people know, but after World War II, the U.S. began this office in order to project propaganda directed mainly against socialist countries, against the socialist camp, against the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. But it expanded worldwide and has spent tens of billions of dollars of U.S. tax funds in order to project Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and in the case of Cuba, Radio Martí and TV Martí, which is jammed by Cuba, by the way, as is their right, because it's a violation of international law regarding communications, television, radio. And it continues to be funded despite the fact that it is propaganda. And as a matter of fact, recognizing it as propaganda, the US government prohibited, up until recently, its broadcasting into the United States because they said it's propaganda and the US people shouldn't be allowed to hear that. But in fact, it was used to help try to dismantle other countries' governments. So I'm for the abolition of that office.
Mr. Pierce.
Complex issue. I think that these omnibus spending bills in general are a problem. The idea that you get this big expenditure but without details. You think you're voting on one issue, but there's 99 things buried in it. I think in general that's a problem, and I think there should be more detail in these spending bills that are presented. Omnibus spending bills in general are a problem. Government propaganda, military propaganda, yeah, definitely. First Amendment, freedom of speech. At a time like this where I think it really matters. I've been on the forefront of innovation for a while, so I've been watching censorship happening by big tech companies. Now, because of what's happened in the last week or so, it's been brought to the forefront of most of America's attention. And this is a very real issue. Censorship, free speech. If these big tech companies want to be platforms, they need to be platforms. If they want to, and then they're absolved of their liabilities. If they want to be publishers, they have to then accept the liability. Pick one or the other. Which is it? You can't say, I want all the benefits of the platform, but the ability to censor like a publisher and pick who speaks. I think this is a major issue. I think we need to end the authorization of military detention. This is the idea that we can lock up Americans without any due process is a problem. And thank you. Yes.
Mr. Hawkins.
Well, it's obviously hypocritical for this government to complain about state media in other countries and then have an office that practices it at home and propagandizes its own people. Obviously, we need to get rid of that. And also, as just mentioned in the NDAA, is a provision for preventive detention of journalists who are accused of quote-unquote terrorism because they might interview some people we call terrorists doing their job. Or anybody they call a terrorist. They're calling Black Lives Matter people protesting police brutality terrorists. And those people can be snatched, as we saw some of them, and just disappear. No right of habeas corpus, which gives you the right to find out what your charge is and go before a judge and say you're being wrongly held. That's gone. And we talk about being the land of the free. And in fact, if you look at the Phoenix program, that genocidal program that assassinated about 40,000 Vietnamese, tortured, tiger cages during the Vietnam War, that's been reconstituted without the particular torture yet under DHS in this country in response to 911. It's all sitting right there. And let's talk about state media. We got, I call them corporate state media stenographers. They're nominally privately owned, but they only repeat what the two major parties say. And the CIA has been caught embedding journalists in NPR and in CNN. State media. We got plenty of it here. We need media reform. We need to repeal the Telecommunications Act of 1994 that allowed the consolidation into 5 or 6 media conglomerates of all kinds of media. We need to restore so that you have lots of independently owned media in every media market. And then print media is losing its business model because the paid advertising going to the social media. And I think what we need is public funding. We subsidize the post office when the country was founded so people could get newspapers and pamphlets. We need to do the same thing for investigative journalists. Have public boards selected by like juries that allocate funding to investigative journalism so we can find out what the hell our government is doing.
Thank you. We have another question from Brian Anderson, the ambassador of Nexus.
What are your views on the negative effects of centralized control of technologies have on our society, and do you feel decentralized innovations such as blockchain can be used to alleviate these? Thank you, and we look forward to your response.
Ms. Lariva.
Well, I think that the whole issue of technology, in a capitalist system, works against the people. Whether it's surveillance, whether it's using technology to reduce employment, as Amazon does, and using robotic inventories and cutting back, and also using surveillance to keep Amazon workers from unionizing. Amazon doesn't make enough profit, apparently, and pays no taxes, but they will always want more and more, as all the major capitalists do. So technology, in a general sense, would be helpful and beneficial to the people under a socialist system, where the people's needs come first, where the profit motive is removed. This is the basic problem to so many issues that we face, really all the issues, whether it's the pharmaceuticals pumping out these drugs, advertising them. I don't know if people know, but of the top 100 pharmaceutical companies, 64 spend twice as much on advertising as they do on research and development, and on and on.
Mr. Pierce.
Centralized versus decentralized systems. Yes, I think we're moving towards more distributed and decentralized systems, and it will serve us well. The tech giants like Amazon, Google, and Facebook having monopolies over their respective markets is a problem, and I think decentralized solutions are the answer. We are creating new value chains, new economic systems that change the game in terms of how we participate. I'm so excited that I've been able to be involved in the development of many of these systems, because I think that's how we will overcome the challenge. Now, another thing that does get very complicated, I could make an argument that this is an antitrust issue and we should do something about it. Though there is a challenge here that you're not going to hear brought up by almost anyone. Artificial intelligence and quantum computing are a big deal. And all of that capacity and capability resides within these big tech companies. So if we did go to try and break them up, what happens in the race towards artificial intelligence and quantum supremacy? It is a complicated issue, and we don't have the right answer yet. But I do believe that decentralized solutions and products and services will address at least the consumer side of the problem, and how we deal with artificial intelligence and quantum computing going forward is the complicated one that does matter. Technology is changing the world rapidly. We've seen how social networking is impacting our democracy. Take a look at the movie The Social Dilemma on Netflix if you have not. And between artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, we need visionary leadership in this country that has their finger on the pulse. Technology is neither good or bad. It is a tool. How we use it will determine the impact it has.
Mr. Hawkins.
Yeah, I think technology is lending itself to decentralization, which is to say it's lending itself to a democratic social society, because social ownership and democratic administration is more transparent and easier to do when it's on a human scale, a decentralized scale. And the blockchain idea for voting is good if it's secure and transparent, which is the objective. And certainly that's better than proprietary software in scanners and voting machines where the proprietors, these capitalist firms, can flip the vote. So that's a good advance. The internet is decentralized as long as we got net neutrality, and they've taken that away from us. We got to get that back. One of the things that happens with this modern technology and computerization is miniaturization. And you know, you can produce things on a smaller scale. The economies of scale are smaller than they used to be. The energy we use in a sustainable society, solar and wind, is distributed. You don't have to be near a river for water power, or near a coal field, or you're dependent on who owns the coal, or the oil or the gas. So that lends itself to decentralization. And same thing with food production. We're talking about getting rid of corporate-owned, absentee-owned, chemicalized industrial agriculture, and going back to organic family farming in regionalized markets where your produce comes from farmers you can actually go out and visit. And then there's the question of productivity gains, which this technology brings. Under capitalism, we get a fixed wage. All the surplus value we create goes to the people that own it. Unearned income to the rich. So that's the reason for social ownership. And people get rewarded according to the work they contribute, not according to the property they own, which just makes the society more unequal than before. So I think technology is, we call it the force of production in socialism, and that's something that we should decentralize in order to democratize and have, worker and community control of production.
Mr. Carroll.
Yeah, I realize I'm speaking to a technology-fluent audience, and I'm more technology catch as catch can. And so I'm not going to try and fill you with my expertise here. I've spent my life teaching 8th graders the Constitution, and so every year I go through the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment and try and explain it to students. And I don't think that those principles have changed. They're just challenged now. And I do have a nephew that I've sat down with. His full-time job is trying to figure out, stay a step ahead of artificial intelligence and figure out how to rein it in so that it doesn't control us completely and human beings lose track of it. I do think that the decentralized idea, the antitrust idea, how hard would it be for Facebook to just spin off the different things like Instagram that it bought? It bought them and added them in. They can take them out and put them someplace else and have it under separate management so that we don't have centralized control over all of the technology that we are facing. We need to go back to the basic checks and balances in our Constitution. And admittedly, the checks and balances were there to control government, but we need to put the same kinds of things into our business models. We created the Interstate Commerce Commission. When the trains got too big, no individual state could control the railroads because they crossed state lines. And so we had to put a whole new level of government in there to control it. And we will probably have to do the same thing with the technological giants that are controlling us. Things like net neutrality and all that kind of stuff is really helpful. But the basic thing is we have to divide so that we don't have any one power controlling all of that and thereby controlling us.
Our next question.
May I have another minute?
Please.
I think it's my last one.
You actually have 2 more.
Oh, okay, good. I don't think it's a question of centralization versus decentralization. Breaking up Facebook would be have the same effect as breaking up Bell Telephone years ago. They just monopolized once again. Or breaking up Standard Oil. And breaking up oil monopolies, they're just as powerful as ever, just as warmongering as ever, trying to overthrow Venezuela for the largest source of oil in the world, trying to create conflict between Guyana and Venezuela, for example, because there's such a huge amount of oil in Guyana. The question is of a system. I think that Facebook should be expropriated. I think that Amazon, all the big companies, they should all be expropriated so that people can really decide how to use those resources efficiently and not just for profit. The telephone, every new generation of new iPhones, for example, is hurting the environment. It's killing the environment. And what we need is a new system, not just trying to move around the chairs on a sinking ship.
All right, our next question is from someone I can call a personal friend of mine, a world-renowned author on the monetary, the Federal Reserve. And his name is G. Edward Griffin. You may know him as the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. So I want to welcome Mr. Griffin's question.
If you were the President of the United States, what would your position be on the maintenance of national sovereignty versus the gradual surrender of it piece by piece through treaties and agreements and executive orders which give away control over our military, our educational system, our economy, and so forth to international forces? What is your position? And would you veto anything that came across your desk that would be contrary to that position? And then the other issue, of course, is our money supply. Do the candidates like what we have? Do they like having the money supply of the United States completely in the hands of a private banking cartel called the Federal Reserve System? Or are they going to take a stance against that? And if so, why?
Mr. Pierce.
Sovereignty. I pray for self-sovereignty for each and every one of you. And as we think about our role in the world and how we interact with foreign nations, we are not alone. We share this one earth. And it's important, if we're entering into agreements, if we're entering into treaties with foreign nations, that we are creating win-win or all-win situations. And I would much prefer a treaty over a war. I think in the context of the Federal Reserve, if I were president and it were 1913, there would be no Federal Reserve. Yet it's the year 2020, and we have to deal with the practical realities of the moment, which means you can't just end the Fed overnight without creating more problems than you solve. And so what is the process to creating a better monetary system in this country? I think it starts with transparency. It's putting in place the right process to audit the Fed. And understanding the role that technology plays in this. I created the US digital dollar in 2014. That's doing $10 trillion a year in transactional volume right now. Governments around the world are using that framework to use technology to enhance their currency. China has created the Chinese digital yuan, and they are years ahead of us. The dollar is at risk because of our fiscal policy, because of our national debt. And I will be using my minute after this.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins.
Well, sovereignty in terms of international agreement can cut both ways. The trade agreements we've been agreeing to have undercut our sovereignty. We haven't lost it to international bodies, we've lost it to corporations. The trade dispute forums in a lot of these trade agreements we got into allow states and corporations, but not labor and the public, to know what goes on. The deliberations are secret. The written opinions are secret. Only the final decision is made public, and it's used to undercut our ability to regulate our labor and environmental standards in our country. They call them non-tariff trade barriers. So those are not agreements we should be getting into, because it does undercut our sovereignty, which is to say our democracy. On the other hand, there are international problems, like the nuclear arms race, like the climate crisis, like cybersecurity, You know, we complain about these countries hacking into our election system and spreading their perspectives, which they call disinformation, on candidates and conspiracy theories and all that. But you know, Putin offered to negotiate a cybersecurity treaty with George Bush, with Barack Obama, and now with Donald Trump. We haven't taken him on that. We should, because it can be like an arms control treaty. Mutual transparency, inspections, and dealing with problems that arise through a process. So I don't think international agreements necessarily undermine our sovereignty, which is our democracy. It depends on the agreement. As far as the money supply goes, yes, the Fed should be nationalized. Should be a monetary authority within the Treasury Department that can make the decisions about the supply of money and monetary policy, and that would be monetary sovereignty.
Mr. Carroll.
I don't think I see anything in what's been said that I'm going to disagree with. Certainly we need to re-examine all of our trade agreements. For example, in our trade agreement, NAFTA, where we decided, or were able to sell a lot of our corn, and I know we grow a lot of corn here, but in the process of doing that, we destroyed the native economy in northern Mexico. Subsistence farmers who survived on the little bit of corn that they could grow could no longer sell even the little bits that they had in the local markets. And as a result, that increased the pressure of immigrants at our border, and we don't want to take responsibility for that. So there's always going to be unforeseen consequences of any treaty, but we need to be prepared to mitigate the consequences when they happen, and that's one that we haven't. We do need some international treaties for international problems. The biggest crisis we face right now is climate change, and that's not going to be solved by one country. We need to get back into the Paris agreements and up the ante. We need to deal with the banking cartels. Again, international banks have figured out how to avoid national boundaries, and we have to somehow rein them in. And if it means putting some kind of an international treaty or breaking them up or whatever it is, I happen to favor lots and lots of local banks that will lend locally as best as possible. And I don't have any more 4 seconds to add.
Ms. Lariva.
Yes, as far as the banks, I think all the banks should be nationalized on a socialist basis. Think of what they have stolen in all these decades. The private international US controlled banks, they have stolen hundreds of billions of dollars from the people of Africa, from the people of Latin America, who have paid the debt over and over, and the debt is larger than ever, which denies them the right to development, denies them the right to care for their people. I think that the debt should be canceled internationally. The US has bled the world enough, and has bled the people of the world enough too. The banks should be nationalized, and all that wealth, which comes from our labor, should be used for social development, for social investment, for rebuilding the cities, from Gary, Indiana, to Chicago, to Los Angeles, to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. I think that you just have to look at what the Federal Reserve did with the Treasury Department, with the system, right before the pandemic was declared. When they said in late February, we have to make sure that Congress gives us a quicker rescue than what took place in 2008. And you can read it in the press. They said it took months to get those $700 billion for a crisis that they caused. They caused the housing crisis. They were the ones who foreclosed on 5 million homes and then didn't have to report for any of that money that they spent in their increased profits. The U.S. violates treaties all the time. The U.S. violates other countries' sovereignty. It's not the other way around. And I think that we should unilaterally disarm the nuclear weapons that the United States has. That would be the real way to peace. And lift all sanctions from the dozens of countries that the U.S. imposes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yeah, so back to the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is the foundation of this nation. The U.S. dollar is the foundation of our nation's economy. If something negative were to happen to that status, the adverse effects it would have on all of our lives, all of our businesses, and all of our institutions are very real. And it is at risk because of our national debt, because of our fiscal policy. Did you know that 22% of all dollars in existence were created this year? It is at risk because of the decisions and the actions that we are making here. We are eroding faith, trust, and confidence in it. Well, at a time that technology is also requiring us to be competitive. This is a major issue that you are not hearing brought up by any of the other candidates in the debates that you've been seeing. And it is very real. We're not even hearing about fiscal policy anymore. Like, we have to have fiscal policy. This stuff matters. How are we going to adapt to this ever-changing environment? Technology has a very important role to play in this. China is years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll, 1 minute rebuttal extension.
Yeah, when we talk about banks, one of the things that I would do, probably the first thing I would do when I got into office, would appoint a commission to rewrite the 14th Amendment. Because when that was written, they left out a critical word. When it says all persons born, persons should say natural persons. A person is a living human being, and if a person breaks the law, they can go to jail. And you cannot send a bank to jail. We ought to. And so when we are looking at rewriting the 14th Amendment, it should not protect corporations. When that was written, and there was fraud in the way it was written, they intentionally left the word natural out of that. And it was done by Senator Roscoe Conkling of New York, who later was arguing in front of the court. And that has to be returned. That has to be repealed, has to be changed. If a bank robs people, somebody has to go to jail.
All right, we'll move on to our next question. Gloria, you have 1 rebuttal left. Mr. Pierce, you have 1 left. Mr. Hawkins, you have 3 left, and Mr. Carroll 2. So we'll move on to our next question from one of our sponsors, supporters, the Independent Project. This is a question from Kaya.
I'm Kaya Los Huertos, and you might hear my 8-month-old son in the background. I'm the program coordinator for the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, or NANR for short. I became involved in the election reform movement, or the Voters First movement, through the Independent Voter Project. IVP focuses on election reform and education in California, and over the years I've been involved in a number of their efforts to enact reform in San Diego. At NANR, I'm able to support election reform organizations around the country, like IVP, through our events and services. And here's my 3-part question. Across the nation, about half of registered voters don't identify with either major political party. Yet in many states, closed primaries prevent these voters or independent candidates from participating in taxpayer-funded primaries. What is your position on closed primaries? What is one reform you would make to the election process to level the playing field for voters and candidates? And finally, would you support an effort to create an independent primary election for voters and candidates from any party affiliation or no party affiliation? Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins.
I think parties should have the right to have their primaries open or closed. It should not be something the government tells parties what to do. That's an area where parties should have sovereignty under their own ways. And, a lot of parties want their members to decide who their candidate is, not people that are not members. So if other parties want to draw them in through open primaries, that's their right. I think the most significant thing we can do is institute ranked choice voting in a presidential election, get rid of the Electoral College, have a national popular vote for president using ranked choice voting. That gets rid of the spoiler problem, gets rid of the electoral college program that puts losers like Donald Trump in the presidency when he came in 3 million votes behind Hillary Clinton in 2016. George Bush did the same thing, lost the popular vote. The Supreme Court stopped the count in Florida and put him in the presidency. Electoral college has got to go. And then for electing Congress, we can use ranked choice voting for multi-member districts. So we get proportional representation in Congress. So every party and everybody's politics get reflected in Congress. So the debate is not just during the election, it's after the election too, in the legislative bodies where we're represented. And as far as an independent primary, you know, why should the state organize a primary for people that aren't organized and have people compete for that endorsement and have another candidate on the ballot? You know, there's a point of having a political party. That's to get organized around your perspective. And if the independent voters, you know, can't do that, then that's on them, not us to pay the primary for them.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll.
Yeah, I can speak mostly from experience in California, where we have the jungle primary, everybody on the same ballot. And parties become much less important in that. And I would like to see easier access for third parties to be recognized. I was on the state committee for the American Solidarity Party. I was a dues-paying member, but when they listed me on the ballot, I was listed as no party preference because we didn't have the 60,000 signatures to become a recognized party. And so that would be the first thing I would like to see in California. I can't speak for all the other states, but that would be one thing. I think the ranked choice voting, I think, and California managed to get rid of gerrymandering. That is still a big problem in a lot of states. But I think the main things to do are open the doors so that independents and small party people can get in. We're facing a thing right now. I'm on the ballot in 8 states, and I'm a write-in candidate in 33. And we have a situation where in some states, every county has their own method of doing write-in. And in some counties, you have to write my name and my vice president's name, Amar Patel. And in other counties, if you write Amar Patel, that voids your ballot. And so there needs to be uniformity, especially in write-ins, so that people who want to write it in can do it without risking voiding their ballot.
Ms. Lariva.
Yes, I don't know if people realize, but the traditional open primary exists in 19 states. And in those states, like in Texas, for example, when you register to vote, you don't register as a party, you just register to vote. And then when election time comes in the primaries, you can pick which party you want to be involved in. I think the problem with those advocates of the top 2, as exists in California and Washington, is that they call that basically open primary. It's not. It's denying the right of smaller parties to go beyond the primary where they choose their own nominee and then go on to the general election. I was a candidate for governor in 2018, but we went on the ballot in November, even though I won the primary. That's completely anti-democratic, and there's a court challenge, which I hope that we will win. So no top 2. I think there should be same-day voter registration across the country. And voters should be able to vote on a Sunday, when most of the time they're not working. And I think we have to remember the people who don't have the right to vote. We can't talk about democracy just on the issue of voting, when 17 million permanent residents are not allowed to vote, when 11 million undocumented workers are not allowed to vote, and in fact living under fear of deportation, denied all legal rights, or 5 million prisoners or ex-prisoners. They should all be allowed to vote. That's 33 million people, 33 million voting age adults, and that the voting age should be lowered to 16. Why shouldn't they be allowed to vote? They work, including prisoners' work. And they should have prevailing wage inside prison so that when they get out, they can have an income so that they can rebuild their lives. I say real democracy means one person, one vote.
If taxpayer funds are going to be used in the primaries, they should be available to all parties, or not. The two major parties are using government infrastructure for it, giving us the false impression that they are the government. They're political parties. I believe it is up to the political party if they want to have an open or closed primary. In terms of reform, I think we need ballot access reform. Here's a little fact for you. If you want to run for president as a Democrat or a Republican, you need about 25,000 petitions or signatures. As an independent candidate, you need about 700,000. I think we need some ballot access reform. I'm also an advocate for ranked choice voting. Do you know who the last third-party candidate was to become president? Abraham Lincoln was a third-party candidate. And what he did is he built a coalition of third parties, and he built a government of rivals. He figured out how to bring the smaller parties together to create a government so that they could overcome the two larger parties at the time. I hope as third parties that we begin to have these sorts of conversations to figure out at least how we can collaborate. We may not agree on, call it our ideology and platform position, but we do stand to benefit by using shared infrastructure, shared petitioning. We have limited resources. We can accomplish more working together. I hope to work with the other third parties. I hope we can build a coalition. I hope we can Voltron to get our bolt on.
Well, I'm going to use one of my minutes.
Please.
The question was, what's the most important reform? That was hard to decide. I said ranked choice voting, so we get rid of the spoiler problem in electing president and executive officers, and we get proportional representation in our legislative bodies. But I could have said voting rights. We've had 17 million people purged from the rolls, mostly by Republican initiatives, by falsely saying people who were felons or had the same name as somebody in another state and they're voting in two states, and all this nonsense. Voter ID or voter ID to vote. So if you're a student in Madison, Wisconsin or Austin, your student ID won't let you vote. If you got a gun permit or a driver's permit, you can vote, but a lot of students don't have those. All kinds of ways they suppress the vote. But it's not just the Republicans. The Democrats are suppressing the Green Party. Think about that. They're suppressing a political party. They challenge our ballot access petitions. We've been knocked off states where we got double or triple the number of signatures we need. Running for office is the most concentrated form of exercising the First Amendment. It's freedom of speech, petitioning the government, freedom of religion, which is freedom of thought, freedom of the press, and they're suppressing that. And they want us to worry about, the neo-fascist, Trump's attitudes. What about them suppressing the party? It's not just challenge our ballot signatures. They triple the number of votes we need to keep our ballot line in New York. When the New York Times got wind of that, they called it the Democrats' secret plan to kill third parties.
All right, your time's up.
So we need federal standards for fair ballot access as a reform, and we need to restore the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act. So all these repression of the votes that the Republicans have done, they did it right after the Supreme Court got rid of the pre-clearance provision.
Please, thank you. That's almost a second rebuttal.
Maybe I used 2 of my minutes, but I think those are fundamental to democracy.
All right, we're going to move a little faster. I'll be lenient there, Howie, but all right. So we have one more rebuttal left from Gloria and Brock, and Howie and Brian, you have 2 there. We're going to go 1 minute response to the question. If you want to do an extension, feel free. But the next question is a topic we've just kind of already went over pretty extensively. It's from Ronaldo Pearson of Represent Us, one of our supporters. What a great organization. So Ronaldo, here's his question. 1 minute response.
Hello, my name is Ronaldo Pearson, and I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Represent Us, the nation's largest grassroots anti-corruption campaign, bringing together conservatives, progressives, and everyone in between to advance electoral reforms to unrig the system and fix our broken democracy. One of those electoral reforms is ranked choice voting, which our movement recently won in Maine in 2016, New York City last year, and RCV is on the ballot in Massachusetts and Alaska this year. Could you tell us what ranked choice voting would mean for you and the viability of third-party candidates in the future? Thank you.
Mr. Carroll, 1 minute response.
Let me read from the American Solidarity Party platform. Quote, all elections should be held using either ranked choice or approval voting, period. And I certainly endorse my party platform. I think that various places in the country, we have 24 different states or cities within those states that are experimenting with some degree of ranked choice voting this year. A big task is educating the voters. A lot of voters look at it for the first time and think somehow they're being cheated of their votes. So there is an educational task involved, but we need to put the effort into educating people, and we need to make sure that every election has that as the procedure.
Ms. Lariva.
Yes, of course I'm for ranked choice voting. I think it's an important reform. But realistically, when you look at the whole panorama of what we're facing in the United States on the issue of a very unjust electoral system, highly anti-democratic, that is becoming more restrictive, as Howie Hawkins mentioned, of what happened to the Green Party, of how extremely hard it is to get on any ballot, of the billions that it takes to become a president of the United States. The struggle really is necessary in that the people organize to get a union in the workplace, to organize against police terror and racism, to organize for economic rights, to organize en masse by the millions for the right to have housing and not be evicted by some greedy landlord in this whole pandemic, and to talk about economic rights. I don't know that it can really be achieved just by having some electoral reforms. They're important ideas to bring up, but we're facing a real plutocracy, sisters and brothers.
Thank you. Mr. Pierce.
I can tell you the system is rigged. And so, yes, to on-rigging the system. For example, we set up our campaign headquarters in Los Angeles in the beginning. And when they did the COVID lockdown, they decided that campaigning in an election year is not an essential business, making it not legal to do our jobs, which benefits the incumbents. We then moved to New York. You normally need 15,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And in April, as New York was getting hit harder than anywhere in the country, what did they do? They increased the number to 45,000. They also made it that if you had ballot access as a third party, if you put a candidate on the ballot in New York and your candidate didn't get 2% or 130,000 of the votes, your party is forever disbanded. Our democratic process is under attack. It's at risk. This country's been divided. And so I would like to remind everyone to vote your conscience, to vote your conscience. It is an illusion that you only have two choices. Ranked choice voting is one of the answers that will at least help us. If you're still caught up in this idea that you have to vote red or blue, you can at least this way vote more than once. Thank you.
Yeah, I've already spoken in favor of ranked choice voting, but I would tell this brother that asked the question, New York, they passed ranked choice voting for major party primaries only. not for the Green Party or the other minor parties, and not for the general election. We got to start calling defeats victories. It was only the Green Party advocating RCV right the way through during the hearings. So now the irony is New York City used to have ranked choice voting for their city council between 1935 and 1947. They went from a council of 24 Democrats and 1 Republican to 5 to 7 parties. Every 2 years they had elections until 1947, when the stupid Republicans united with the Democrats to get rid of it, even though it meant the Republicans lost all their seats, or all but one token one. Because of those 5 to 7 parties were parties of the left, including the black communists from Harlem, which scared the hell out of them in the Cold War. So New York City's had it before. And the last point I'll make is, every ballot access fight we've had partisan hacks deciding Republican for us on, Democrats for us off, in boards of election and in the courts. What kind of country has the governing parties running their own elections? We should do like other countries and have an independent civil service agency administering the elections. So it's not partisan like what we got.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on quickly. This is going to be a question, 1-minute response coming from really one of the top election law experts in the United States who has testified in over 350 cases to better our ballot access laws the last 35 years, Richard Winger of Ballot Access News. This is his question. The ballot access laws have generally improved over the last 35 years, although there is a significant minority of states that have made them worse. When things have improved, that is usually a result of minor party and independent activists lobbying their state legislatures to improve the laws. That has worked very well in over half the states in the last 35 years. Do you have any plans to ask your activists if they are willing to do the work of talking to their state legislators? Ms. Lariva, 1 minute.
That's a really great idea. And Richard Winger has been for decades working on behalf of all parties' rights to access, especially it benefits those of us who are third parties, so-called third parties. But yes, we should, and we will work on that. In fact, we've worked with Richard in the past on lawsuits, one that we were part of in Washington, D.C., to successfully get on the ballot there. We actually are on the ballot in D.C. as a result of a suit. 1988, I worked with Richard to get on the ballot in New Mexico. Very interesting. It was a catch-22. But if you got 500 valid signatures, you would be on the ballot, and it was permanent. Well, we succeeded in the federal lawsuit, and then the legislature changed the law to say you need now 3,400 signatures valid, and if you don't get a certain percentage, like 2% of the gubernatorial vote, then you're kicked off. So, I agree on the issue of it becoming more restrictive in some places. Thank you, Richard, for the suggestion.
Thank you, Ms. Lariva. And Mr. Winger asked again, do you have any plans to ask your activists if they are willing to do the work of talking to their state legislatures? Mr. Pierce.
Activism. I think it's time we activate. It's time we get involved. The future is going to happen to you, or the future is going to happen with you. It is imperative that we do something. It is time to step up. I am looking for 100 candidates, so I ask you, what are you prepared to do? I'm looking to help put candidates into office that can directly represent the constituents that got them there, to see a government of, for, and by the people. So if you're a doctor, if you're a teacher, if you're an engineer, scientist, artist, athlete, entrepreneur, I'm looking for people that want to step into office as civil servants that are not looking for money or looking for power. I think this is the moment. This is the moment of our political rise, and I am so grateful to be here with each and every one of you. Let's get involved. Let's do this.
Mr. Hawkins.
Yeah, the Green Party has been doing this and will continue to lobby state governments for fair ballot access. Also, we want a federal standard for fair ballot access in federal elections. And Richard Winger is an invaluable resource. He has encyclopedic knowledge of these issues, and everybody should be in touch with him, subscribe to Ballot Access News to work on these issues. This year we are on the ballot in North Carolina. That was a 30-year struggle. Georgia, we got the requirements reduced. But the problem this year was the pandemic, and it was against public health guidelines to go out there dressed up like you're in a hazmat operation trying to get people's signatures. And we were lobbying state governments. We got relief from some, others told us no. We went to the courts. We won some lawsuits. We lost some lawsuits. It's a damn battle. It's off the charts in this country to get on the damn ballot. You want to run for Congress in this country as an independent without a ballot line, takes thousands of signatures or tens of thousands of signatures in most states. You want to run for the House of Commons in England, it's 10 signatures. You want to run for Congress in India, the largest democracy in the world, it's 2 signatures. It's 100 in Canada, but here it's thousands or tens of thousands. And we call ourselves a democracy. We exclude parties that are more popular than the 2 damn capitalist parties.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Carroll.
Yes, I probably did it 4 or 5 times today. And the voters that are contacting me that are most angry are from the Carolinas, North and South Carolina. And we have very, very active committees there. They worked hard and could not get us on the ballot. And so I have voters writing to me and saying, how come we can't vote for you? How come we can't write you in North Carolina? Or how come we can't write you in South Carolina? And I'm telling them, what you need to do in your state is get organized and go talk to your legislators and get the law changed prior to 2022 or 2024, because there's no reason for the kinds of bar that they set against write-ins or small parties.
Thank you. Our next question, 1-minute response. Automation and advanced artificial intelligence will soon make millions of jobs obsolete. Yours, mine, those of our accountants and radiologists and grocery store cashiers. America needs to take radical steps to prevent the Great Depression level unemployment and a total societal meltdown, including handing out trillions of dollars in cash. Do you believe that artificial intelligence should be regulated? And if so, what is your plan for America with respect to AI and automation? Mr. Pierce.
Yes. Again, technology is amoral. It is neither good or bad. It is a tool. How we use it determines the impact it has on our lives. And the impact technology is having is going to continue to accelerate, which is why we need visionary leadership with the foresight to understand how to navigate the road ahead. We need leadership with their finger on the pulse. When we see our technology leaders testify before our elected officials, it is embarrassing, the quality of the questions being asked. And it is very difficult to put the cat back in the bag. Yes, technology is going to be replacing many of our jobs. And with the universal earned income, we can give Americans the room they need to take a step back. I live to work or live to serve. Many people work to live or to survive. If we manage this correctly, people will start to do what they love, what they're passionate about, and we will have a renaissance in this country by the year 2030.
Mr. Hawkins.
We've been hearing about technological unemployment due to productivity increases. You used to call it automation, now artificial intelligence, since the 1960s. But what has happened is people have been displaced from goods production, which is easily automated, to personal services, hospitality industry. And we have as many people working, but it's lower wages. So the question is, how do we appropriate the increased productivity? If you look at wages and productivity on a chart, wages increased with productivity till about 1970. Since then, wages have been stagnant and productivity's kept increasing. That's an argument for socialism. Social ownership of major means of production, and then the surplus we create with our labor, we get to collectively decide how to use it. Instead of it going to the capitalists who get richer and richer, and the rest of us struggle to survive. One way you can do that, if you still have capitalist enterprises, is to tax that surplus It's due to technology and
Thank
distributed
you.
as a social dividend.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carroll.
Yeah, that was a 5-part question with 1 minute to answer, and so I'm going to focus in on the UBI portion of it because capitalism only works if the people at the bottom have the money to purchase the things being bought or being produced up the scale. And we don't have that. We don't. Trickle-down economy does not work. Money trickles up from below. And so we have to make sure that the people at the bottom who are losing their jobs, especially losing good jobs, have some level of money to put into the economy from the bottom so it can percolate up. And we can start that right now with the carbon fee and dividend. That's HR 763. It'll have a new number in the new Congress, but it collects money on every piece of carbon, every pound of carbon that comes out of the ground, and it returns it to the people. It won't be as big as the UBI that Yang was suggesting, but it's a start, and I would like to see it start.
Thank you. Ms. Lariva.
Again, technology under capitalism means more exploitation, more poverty, and more wealth for the billionaires. You know, some of the billionaires recently have been saying, well, maybe we got too much money because people are starting to get angry. Socialism is getting very popular. And so they're proposing things like the UBI, a basic income for the poorest to assure that, well, you'll get $1,000. But it will keep people poor. What people need is employment, meaningful employment. We need a $20 an hour minimum wage and to be able to have free health care and education so you don't have to use your wages to pay for what should be a right. That there's a need for millions of teachers so that students can really get a good education. We need construction workers. We need to build mass transit in every major city and small town. We need the rebuilding of the water systems. In short, we need the infrastructure completely rechanged. We need to help countries that have been bombed and destroyed by the United States. They need reparations as well. And I call in our program of the PSL, we call for reparations for the Black and Native communities in the United States. So I don't think that the UBI is really a progressive thing. I think what we need is to take that trillions of dollars of the billionaires. Mark Zuckerberg's wealth grew 46% in those 9 weeks of the pandemic. Bloomberg, 25% increase. And Elon Musk, 48% increase in 9 weeks of pandemic. And it's been months now. Take their wealth and give it back to the people who it has been stolen from.
Thank you, Gloria.
I'd like to use my last minute.
Please.
And then I'd like to use my minute.
Okay.
As we continue to talk about technology, I think it's worth bringing up blockchain-based voting. In Utah County, the first ballot cast in Utah State was a blockchain-based vote. For me, this will ensure the integrity of our electoral process. I think it's also worth noting that there are 55 million Americans that are still unbanked, and that technology is a tool for financial inclusion. As we talk about the pursuit of happiness, if we were going to re-architect Maslow's hierarchy of needs today, having access to a computer or a phone and an internet connection and basic financial tools would be essential to the pursuit of happiness. And again, there's so many things that technology can do for us in a good way, which is again why we need people that understand the ways this can be used and to ensure that it is a tool to enhance our lives, to enhance our businesses, and to enhance our institutions. Thank you.
Mr. Carroll, 1 minute.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with Gloria that jobs are more important than the UBI. The UBI is simply a floor. But if we're going to have an economy that meets everybody's needs, we need to be able to bring more people in as entrepreneurs. Distributism has that goal. It's been said that socialism is when the government owns the means of production. Capitalism is when a few rich people own the means of production. And distributism is when lots of people own the means of their own production. It's capitalism on steroids. And I don't like the idea, I don't necessarily like the idea of moving everything into Bitcoin. I had an interesting conversation over here with a fellow who was telling me how great it was that people can move their money across borders. But in the United States, 40% of our neighbors have a net worth of 0 or negative. Those people cannot get into Bitcoin with any, they are going to be left behind. They're going to be starving in the streets.
Thank you. All right, well, I feel like I can squeeze in one more question, then we're going to go into closing statements. So let's keep this question definitely under a minute as quickly as you can. And the question is on the debt crisis. Given the extreme size of the federal debt combined with continued deficit spending, what is your approach to the America's debt crisis? And Mr. Hawkins, please. Final question.
Yeah, the debt crisis we face is people don't have enough jobs. They don't have enough homes. We need to spend more public money to balance what the people need with what the economy can provide. The idea that we're limited by what we can tax to spend, that's not how it works. Federal Reserve creates reserves. The Treasury Department says, spend this money this way and that way according to the federal budget. That's where the money comes from. We don't have to wait for taxes. This whole thing about the budget deficit is acting like the federal government is like the rest of us who are currency users, not currency issuers. And it's created this situation where we feel hamstrung. We can spend a lot more money. We're nowhere near full employment. And when we are at full capacity, then you got to watch how much money you put in the economy, because then it could cause inflation. We're a long way from that. The deficit we got is the deficit in people's needs being met, not the balance in the Treasury and the Federal Reserve. That's irrelevant. When we go into debt, it's a debit on the public side, but it's an asset on the private side. It's a Treasury note or bill. They're going to pay interest to somebody who's got that. We need to really rethink how we think about what the real deficit in the society is. It's not the federal deficit. It's a deficit in people having jobs, income, housing, education, schools, and a clean environment.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll.
We have a debt because we've put the wars we're fighting on credit cards. Howie is right in most things where we invest in this and we've got a road and we've got people got jobs building a road and stuff like that. It does not work when you drop $1 million missile on somebody in Yemen. And so if we're going to get out of debt, we have to stop putting so much money into our military. We have to put it into infrastructure. We have to put it into schools, hospitals. You know, in the last 4 years, 600 rural hospitals have closed. That means the people in this area right here are not going to have a hospital if they need one. The inner cities, there was a zip code I ran for Congress, 12 miles apart. The life expectancy over here was 82 years, and the life expectancy 12 miles away was 68. All the hospitals were over here. There were none over here. We have to have infrastructure, and we lose infrastructure every time we drop a bomb.
Ms. Lariva.
Can I use that minute and my last minute? Is that okay?
Her time constraint is really tight.
Okay.
Right now.
There is so much wealth in this country that could provide for everyone's needs. They talk to us about financial debt. Yes, there is a deficit for sure, caused by militarism, by war, by sanctions, and by the tax breaks to the rich. Trump lowered the tax rate to 25%, but the real taxes paid on average by those corporations because of their lobbyists was an 11%. And so that's why there's indebtedness. And yet there's always trillions to give to the banks, to Wall Street, to the CEOs, as happened in the CARES Act. People got a measly $1,200 that's supposed to last for 8 months. Sisters and brothers, people are suffering by the millions, the tens of millions. I've been on the road seeing people's belongings bulldozed away when they were evicted. We've got to have a whole change in the system. Capitalism is killing people. That's my message.
Thank you. Mr. Pierce.
Yes, we have a very real debt crisis. As I said, 22% of all dollars in existence were created this year, and we are going to begin paying for it next year. But the real solution here is we need some government reform, government restructuring. Our government is on this idea that it's use it or lose it. You get a bigger budget, and if you don't spend it, you don't get it the following year. Like, we need to, if you come in under budget, you're used to, in business, you get a bonus, a promotion, maybe a pay raise. Our government kind of operates like, imagine if you were a farmer. We just keep planting seeds and planting seeds and planting seeds. But along the way, we forgot to prune, we've never harvested, and we've never bothered to pick out the weeds. We have to go through and start to fix some of these very real administrative problems. Some of these accountability issues. The government is grown out of control, and it needs some thoughtful, mindful re-architecture, tax reform. Tax reform. Nobody even knows the tax code.
Thank you. And so we're going to be moving into our closing statements, and I look forward to hearing for each candidate. You have a 2-minute closing statement, that is, for our audience.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for inviting us, not just to this one, but to the one we had in Denver and the one we had in Chicago. It's been a wonderful experience. The American Solidarity Party is pro-life for the whole life, consistent life. That means we are against abortion. We are also against assisted suicide. We are also against capital punishment. We are in favor of the things that make life better, like universal health care. We want everybody to have the opportunity for a healthy life. We don't believe anything that adds to the fears that a woman in a problem pregnancy says, I can't face the future. We need to deal with those fears so that there is not the push, the incentive for her to have that abortion. We are strongly in favor of social justice. And there was another police killing today, I think, in Wisconsin. Very sad. But social justice is so much bigger than that. It's banking laws that keep certain communities from being able to mass wealth and pass it on to their children. There is that clock right? Was it set for 1 minute or 2?
There need to be 2, so keep going.
All right, thank you. We want strong communities. And strong communities are built on strong local businesses. They are built on entrepreneurs that come in. Not, right now, a small business in the United States is defined as one with 500 employees or less. I'm looking at the mechanic who has 3 employees. That's a small business to me. And those are the community that the community need those little businesses to keep going. Strong families. And for that, we need to encourage the kinds of helps that come alongside families, whether it's schools or churches or Little League or all the kinds of things that help parents raise healthy children. I've described distributism. That's our economic program. We want more and more entrepreneurs able to break into an open system. Climate, absolutely imperative. We have got to stop the global warming. And then peace. And I think all of us know what peace would look like.
Gloria?
I'm not the only one talking about socialism. There are tens of thousands of youth who are joining the socialist movement in the United States. It's becoming more and more popular because young people, working class people know that capitalism is destroying their lives. They work all their lives, older people. And then with a natural disaster like Lake Charles and Hurricane Laura, where I visited many, many people there with my members. And then we went to New Orleans, where people are holed up in hotels, being denied the right to rebuild their homes, even though their workers worked all their lives and now have nothing because of global warming, because of capitalist production. We look forward to this struggle after November 3rd because people want a real change. They're not just, most people don't even look to the elections as changing their lives or offering hope for them. I have been all across the country with my members, in the poorest communities, in the working class communities, and people understand when you tell them, you produce the wealth of this country. All of us, millions of people, in international, worldwide production. Everything we wear is made by hundreds. What we wear, what we consume in food, what we use for transport, where we live, the health care we get, is all produced by hundreds of thousands of people in social collective production. The problem is the private ownership. That's the real dictatorship we live under. We're told that it's a democracy, but it's a dictatorship when, for example, in Lordstown, Ohio, a couple of years ago, the largest factory in the world that produced the Cruise car, some of you have that Cruise car in this room, was shut down, leaving thousands of GM workers jobless, looking for a job, losing their home, losing their health care, having to go on strike at another plant that they transferred to. I met them. We need socialism, and I urge people to visit our website, lariva2020.org and pslweb.org. Thank you very much.
Brock.
Well, I'm going to cover a couple of issues we didn't touch on tonight. One is education. We need an effective education for everyone in this country. The youth are the future of this country. And our system of education is more a system of indoctrination. The curriculum needs to be updated so the young people are learning the necessary skills that they're going to need in life. I'd also like to talk about re-legalizing nature or cannabis. The idea that we outlawed nature in 1932 in favor of plastic. That was a mistake. Let's re-legalize nature. And I'd like to talk about the Jones Act. If president, I would sign an executive order to exempt Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico from the Jones Act immediately. Yeah. I guess also in the case of cannabis, I would pardon and expunge every single person for nonviolent crimes in our criminal justice system. We have a lot of problems in this country, but guess what? Innovation is the answer. We got 21st century solutions. We are going to innovate our way out of this mess. So thank you to all the entrepreneurs. I'd like to remind everyone that our job in life is to act according to our conscience. Always do what you believe is right, including voting according to your conscience. I'd like to remind you that a vote for me is a vote for our future. You can learn more at www.brock.vote. Let's dance.
And Howie.
This COVID-19 pandemic has revealed for all of us to see that the two governing parties in this country are presiding over a failed state. The president's a dummy. He lost. He's a loser. He didn't follow the public health advice, and this pandemic is raging 8 months into it. CDC reported 300,000 excess deaths since this pandemic opened up. And the answer is test, contact trace, isolate the affected and exposed, suppress community spread of the virus that way, and we go back to work and school safely. And we're further away from that now than we were in March. And the Democrats are responsible too. Biden could have commanded the press corps and pounded that away, that program. Instead, he hid in his basement till the convention. And here we are with no solution that other countries, the whole Pacific Rim, Europe, have solved. So our green ticket's campaigning for test, trace, and isolate, for a Green New Deal to deal with the climate. And Biden and Trump are opposed to that. We're for Medicare for all. Biden and Trump are opposed to that. We're for ending the endless wars. Biden and Trump are opposed to that. So our argument is a lot of people want to vote for Biden to get rid of Trump. Understand that. But if you do that, you get lost in the sauce. If you are for a Green New Deal and Medicare for all and ending these endless wars, you vote for Biden, you voted against those things. So we're saying don't let your voice be silenced. Don't give away your power. Don't waste your vote on somebody who doesn't believe what you do. Don't let them take it for granted. Vote for what you want and make the politicians come to you.
Well, how about that for elevating the debate? We are wrapping up. And I want to give a heartfelt thanks, to all the candidates out here today, and Gloria and Brock and Howie and Brian. And Howie and Brian have been on this is our third debate in 2020, and they've been on the cycle, and it's been it's so uplifting. These candidates truly give me hope that change is coming. It is. It has to, because the ladder is not an option, right? And so I want to thank you, all of you out there, for being here tonight in person and around the globe. It has been my pleasure to bring these vital and diverse voices to the fore of our political process, because it's far too important and impactful to be entrusted to the current two-party system. We look forward here at Free and Equal Elections to finding even greater common ground and delivering you new ideas and new blood so vital for a free and prosperous global community. A great thanks to the wonderful staff at Little America Hotel and Resort for hosting us and providing such a beautiful venue. And of course, I could not have done this alone. I have to say again, I want to express my endless gratitude to Doug Goodfeather for coming up here earlier, and our producer, Cassidy Marley, Amanda Poole, and her team at Imagine Event Services, and the entire Free and Equal team. And finally, again, our debate sponsors who have the foresight and courage to support such an important endeavor as this, including our co-hosts, Open the Debates partner. Big shout out to Christopher Life and Brittany Kaiser of the Independent National Convention, Nexus, Independent Voter Project, Taxpayers United of America, and AMA Healing.